The Zephyron patrol ship descended through Earth's atmosphere like a falling star, its sleek hull cutting through clouds above the small Montana town. Inside the command deck, Commander Vextor adjusted his four arms across the control panel, his scaled skin reflecting the blue glow of the monitors. "Another primitive world," his lieutenant hissed through mandibles. "The humans barely have functioning space travel. This will be simple." Vextor nodded, studying the tactical display. Earth had been marked for resource extraction after their scouts confirmed abundant rare minerals. The Galactic Council deemed humans too underdeveloped to pose any threat. Standard protocol dictated eliminating potential resistance points first. Below in Whitefish, Montana, Jack Mitchell was teaching his 12-year-old son Danny how to track deer in the woods behind their house. The morning air was crisp, and frost still clung to the pine needles. "See these prints, son?" Jack knelt beside fresh tracks in the mud. "Buck came through here maybe 2 hours ago. Notice how deep they are? He's a big one." Danny studied the marks carefully, his young face serious with concentration. His father had been teaching him woodcraft since he could walk, passing down skills learned during 20 years as a Marine sniper in Afghanistan and Iraq. "Wind's coming from the east, Dad," Danny whispered, testing the air like his father taught him. Jack smiled, ruffling his son's brown hair. "Good catch. Always know your wind." They heard the ship before they saw it, a low humming that made the trees vibrate, growing louder until birds erupted from the branches in panicked flight. Through the canopy, they glimpsed metal and lights impossible to any human aircraft. "Dad?" Danny's voice was small, uncertain. Jack pulled his son behind a thick pine trunk, his combat instincts flaring to life. In all his years of service, through all the battlefields and midnight raids, he'd never seen anything like the craft settling into the clearing ahead. The ship's ramp lowered with a pneumatic hiss. Figures emerged, tall, four-armed beings in armor that seemed to shift and blur at the edges. Jack counted 6, moving with military precision as they fanned out. "Stay behind the tree," Jack whispered to Danny. "No matter what happens, you stay hidden." But Danny had inherited more than just his father's eye color. He'd inherited his courage, too. When one of the aliens raised what was clearly a weapon toward a house visible through the trees, the Hendersons' place where Danny's best friend lived, the boy stepped out. "Stop!" Danny shouted. "Leave them alone!" Everything happened in slow motion. The alien turned, weapon swiveling. Jack lunged forward, but he was 10 feet away, too far. The energy discharge lit the forest like lightning. Danny crumpled to the forest floor, a smoking hole in his chest. "No!" Jack's scream tore through the morning air as he caught his falling son. Danny's eyes, so like his mother's, stared up at him, already growing dim. "Dad?" The word was barely a breath. "I'm here, buddy. I'm here." Jack pressed his hand against the wound, but he knew. 20 years of battlefield medicine told him what his heart refused to accept. Danny's hand found his father's face, a gentle touch. Then it fell away. The aliens had paused, watching with what might have been curiosity. Their leader spoke into a device, the translation emerging in stilted English. "Primitive eliminated. Continuing sweep." Jack laid his son gently on the pine needles, closing those precious eyes for the last time. When he looked up at the aliens, something had changed in his face. The grief was there, an ocean of it, but beneath it burned something else. Something that had kept him alive through 100 missions, that had made him one of the deadliest snipers in U.S. military history. The aliens were already moving away, dismissing him as another primitive, no threat to their superior technology and strength. They didn't notice him memorizing every detail, their gait, their armor's seams, the way they held their weapons. They didn't see him pick up the strange metal fragment that had fallen from Danny's wound, still warm with alien energy. Jack Mitchell had lost everything that mattered. his wife to cancer 3 years ago, now his son to these creatures who saw humans as primitives to be eliminated. They had no idea what they'd just created. That night, as Zephyrin ships appeared over major cities worldwide, as humanity learned it was not alone, and that the universe was hostile, Jack Mitchell sat in his basement workshop. Around him lay the tools of his former trade: precision rifles, rangefinders, ghillie suits, and enough ammunition to supply a small army. He studied the alien metal fragment under a magnifying glass, noting how it seemed to pulse with residual energy. His laptop displayed everything he could find about the attacks: video footage, survivor accounts, patterns of assault. The aliens were methodical, efficient. They established footholds, eliminated resistance, then expanded outward. Military bases fell first, their advanced technology overwhelming Earth's defenses. But Jack noticed something the aliens seemed to miss. They relied too heavily on that technology. Their movements were predictable, their tactics standardized. They fought like soldiers who'd never faced an insurgency, never learned that sometimes the primitive warrior with nothing left to lose was the most dangerous enemy of all. On the wall, Danny's school photo smiled down at him. Beside it hung Jack's service medals: Bronze Star, Purple Heart, Navy Cross. Below them, he'd pinned a new photo, captured from news footage: Commander Vextor, the alien who'd given the order, who'd dismissed his son's death as eliminating a primitive. Jack opened a locked drawer and withdrew a wooden box. Inside, wrapped in oilcloth, lay his custom-built rifle, a .50 caliber monster that had reached out over a mile to touch targets in Afghanistan's mountains. He'd named it Patience, because that's what sniping required above all else. "They want to see primitive?" he whispered to Danny's photo. "I'll show them primitive." The news reported humanity's forces in retreat, governments falling, cities burning. The Zephyrins announced their intent. Earth's resources would be harvested, its population reduced to manageable slave labor. Resistance was futile against the might of the Galactic Council. But in a basement in Montana, Jack Mitchell began to plan. He spread maps across his table, marking alien positions, studying their patrol patterns from survivor reports. Every military base they'd taken, every supply route they'd established, he cataloged it all. The aliens had made two critical errors. First, they'd assumed human weapons couldn't penetrate their armor. Jack studied the fragment, noting stress points and compositional weaknesses. Their armor was designed for energy weapons, not kinetic impact, with the right ammunition, the right angle. Second, they'd killed his son. 3 days after the invasion began, Jack emerged from his basement transformed. Gone was the grieving father. In his place stood something far more dangerous, a man with skills honed over decades, with nothing left to lose, and with a very specific list of targets. He loaded his truck with carefully selected equipment, each piece chosen for a purpose. The aliens had taken the cities, but Jack knew something they didn't. Earth was vast, and much of it was wild. Mountains, forests, deserts, tundra, terrain where a single man who knew the land could become a ghost, striking and vanishing before the enemy even knew they were under attack. As he drove away from his home, Jack touched the photo taped to his dashboard. Him and Danny last Christmas, both wearing ridiculous sweaters and laughing at some joke now lost forever. "I promise you, son," he said quietly. "They'll learn fear, every last one of them." The first lesson came 36 hours later. A Zephyrin supply convoy moving through the Colorado Rockies, confident in their aerial escort and armor. They never heard the shot that killed their escort ship's pilot, sending it careening into a mountainside. They barely had time to register the explosion before precision shots found the gaps in their armor, each bullet carefully crafted with fragments of their own technology turned against them. 6 aliens died in 45 seconds. The lone survivor, wounded and crawling, managed to activate his emergency beacon before a shadow fell across him. He looked up to see a human, face painted in earth tones, eyes cold as winter. "Tell your commander," Jack Mitchell said, pressing a photo into the alien's hand, Danny's school picture. "Tell him the boy's father sends his regards." He vanished into the wilderness before reinforcements arrived, leaving them to find their dead and one terrified survivor babbling about a human ghost. The photo was delivered to Commander Vextor, along with the survivor's report. The commander studied the image of the young human, trying to recall which of the countless primitives they'd eliminated this might be. It didn't matter. One human with primitive projectile weapons hiding in the wilderness? Insignificant. He ordered increased patrols, better convoy protection, a minor annoyance, nothing more. He had no idea the war had already begun. Not the war of fleets and armies, but something older, more personal. The kind of war humanity had perfected over millennia, fought in jungles and mountains and city ruins. The kind of war where one man with the right skills and the wrong reasons could make an empire bleed. Jack Mitchell was already 200 miles away, studying his next target through a spotting scope. The aliens thought they were hunting him. They were wrong. He was hunting them, and he was very, very patient. Commander Vextor stared at the tactical display, his 4 hands clenched in frustration. 7 convoys attacked in 2 weeks, 43 Zephyron soldiers dead. Each time the same pattern, surgical strikes from impossible distances, exploitation of terrain they deemed tactically irrelevant, and always, always that same message left behind. "The boy's father sends his regards." "Commander," Sub-Commander Krillex entered, his scales pale with exhaustion. "We've analyzed the trajectory data from the latest attack. The shots came from over 2 kilometers away. Our scientists say it's impossible for their primitive weapons to maintain accuracy at that range." Vextor turned from the display. "And yet our soldiers are dead." "One human, Commander. Surely we can spare the resources to hunt down one human? One human who has killed more Zephyrin soldiers than any engagement since we arrived." Vextor pulled up the profile they'd assembled. Jack Mitchell, former military, specialized in long-range elimination. The primitive whose offspring had been terminated in the initial assault. They'd sent hunter teams after him. The first team never reported back. They found them 3 days later, each killed by a single shot, arranged in a circle with another photo in the center. The second team lasted longer. They managed to send a distress signal before going silent. Only one survivor, left alive to deliver the same message. "He's teaching them," Vextor mused, studying recent intelligence. Across Earth, small resistance cells were adopting similar tactics. Hit-and-run attacks, targeting weak points in Zephyrin armor their own scientists hadn't known existed. Somehow, this one primitive had reverse-engineered their defensive technology and spread the knowledge. In the Montana wilderness, Jack Mitchell cleaned his rifle in a cave he'd prepared years ago, one of dozens scattered across the country. His network of hides and supply caches, originally meant for hunting trips, now served a different purpose. He opened his laptop, connecting to a satellite phone he'd rigged to piggyback on the alien's own communication network. The encrypted forum he'd created buzzed with activity. Military veterans, hunters, sport shooters, anyone with the skills and courage to fight back. "Tactical Ghost 91, one message read. "Confirmed your ammunition specs work. Took down 2 Greys at 800 meters. They never knew what hit them." Jack smiled grimly, typing a response with detailed instructions for improvised armor-piercing rounds. In 2 weeks, he'd become more than a lone gunman. He'd become a symbol, proof that humanity could fight back. His phone buzzed, a text from Maria Vasquez, former Army Ranger he'd connected with through old military channels. "Package delivered to Denver Cell. They're eager to learn." The package contained more than weapons. It held intelligence gathered from dead Zephyrins, communication devices he'd modified to intercept their transmissions, and detailed anatomical diagrams showing their weak points. Every alien he killed became a classroom, every piece of their technology a lesson in turning their strengths against them. But tonight was special. Tonight, he had a different target. Substation 7 sat in a valley 50 miles south, a Zephyran communications hub that coordinated military movements across 3 states. Heavily defended, surrounded by energy shields and automated defenses designed to stop any conventional attack. Jack studied it through his scope, noting guard positions, shield generator locations, patrol timings. The aliens still thought in terms of armies and forward assaults. They hadn't learned the first rule of asymmetric warfare. The enemy only had to be lucky once. He'd spent 3 days placing charges along the mountain ridge above the station, each one carefully positioned at natural stress points in the rock. Not enough to destroy the facility, but enough to start an avalanche. Nature would do the rest. At 0300 hours, the mountain came down. Thousands of tons of rock and snow crashed into the valley, overwhelming shields designed for energy weapons, not raw kinetic force. The station disappeared beneath the slide, its sophisticated technology buried under the oldest weapon of all, the Earth itself. Jack watched through night vision as Zephyran rescue teams scrambled to respond. He could have picked off several, but that wasn't tonight's purpose. Tonight was about sending a different message. He left the photo where they'd find it, weighted with a piece of their own destroyed communications equipment. This time, he'd added something new, coordinates. Back at Zephyran Command, Vextor received the message with the kind of cold fury his species reserved for the greatest insults. The coordinates led to an abandoned human military facility. The primitive was inviting him to single combat. "It's a trap," Krillex insisted. "He'll have prepared the ground, set ambushes. Of course it's a trap." Vextor was already donning his personal combat armor, equipment reserved for the highest-ranking warriors. "But he's also given us something valuable, a known location. Surround the area, deploy atmospheric drones, ensure he cannot escape." "And if he kills you?" Vextor checked his plasma rifle, its power cell glowing white-hot. "Then you glass the entire grid square. But I will not let this primitive make us look weak before the Galactic Council. The honor of the Zephyran Empire demands his death." Jack watched them come through a spotting scope 2 miles away, counting dropships, noting deployment patterns. They were good, professional soldiers following textbook tactics. Surrounding the facility, establishing overlapping fields of fire, sending in drones to sweep for traps. They found his rifle strategically placed in a sniper's nest. They found the photo. They found the recording he'd left. "Commander Vextor," his voice echoed through alien speakers. "You killed my son. I want you to remember his name, Danny Mitchell, 12 years old. He wanted to be a wildlife biologist. You shot him for the crime of trying to protect his neighbors." Vextor stood in the abandoned facility's main courtyard, weapon ready. Around him, his soldiers maintained vigilant watch. Thermal scanners, motion detectors, every advancement Zephyran technology offered focused on finding one human. "I know you're listening," Vextor spoke into his communicator, broadcasting on the frequency the human had used. "Face me. Primitive. Die with what your species calls honor." 2 miles away, Jack smiled coldly. The aliens thought like soldiers, not hunters. They'd surrounded the facility perfectly, created an inescapable perimeter. They just hadn't considered that he was never in it. He keyed a detonator. The abandoned facility had been a chemical storage site, decommissioned, but never fully cleaned. Jack had spent 2 days redistributing its contents, mixing compounds that should never meet. The explosion, when it came, created a cloud of toxic gas that ate through Zephyran air filters like acid. Jack watched through his scope as aliens stumbled from the cloud, their sophisticated armor useless against simple chemistry. He didn't need to fire a shot. The Earth's own poisons did his work for him. Vextor emerged from the chaos, his command armor's superior filters holding for now. Through the smoke and confusion, he saw movement on a ridgeline. The human, standing in plain sight. Jack Mitchell didn't run. He stood beside his rifle, waiting. Let the alien see him, know who had orchestrated this death trap. One more photo in his hand, Danny, laughing at last year's birthday party. Vextor raised his plasma rifle, advanced targeting systems locking on despite the distance. An impossible shot for primitive technology. Child's play for Zephyrin weapons. The shot took him in the chest, punching through his command armor like paper. As Vextor fell, his last coherent thought was confusion. The human's rifle hadn't moved. Where had the shot come from? 800 meters to Jack's left, Maria Vasquez lowered her rifle, one of Jack's custom builds, firing ammunition he'd developed. She keyed her radio. Target down. Exfil now. They vanished into the wilderness before Zephyrin reinforcements could respond, leaving behind 47 dead aliens and one very clear message. Humanity was no longer fighting alone. Across Earth, the story spread through encrypted channels and whispered conversations. The ghost of Montana had killed a Zephyrin commander, proved their leaders could die just like their soldiers. More importantly, he'd shown it wasn't a solo war anymore. In Denver, a cell used his tactics to destroy a Zephyrin power station. In Seattle, snipers picked off sentries using his ammunition specifications. In Texas, ranchers who'd spent their lives shooting predators at long range turned those skills on different prey. The Zephyrin Empire had expected organized military resistance they could crush with superior firepower. They hadn't expected every human with a hunting rifle to become a potential sniper, every veteran to become a trainer, every Shandi to become a killing field. 6 weeks after Danny Mitchell died, the Zephyrins pulled back from rural areas, concentrating their forces in heavily defended urban zones. They told the Galactic Council it was strategic consolidation. The truth was simpler. They were afraid. Afraid of the ghosts in the mountains. Afraid of shots from nowhere. Afraid of the primitives who'd turned their own planet into a weapon. Jack Mitchell sat by a campfire high in the Rockies, Maria Vasquez and 24 other fighters around him. They'd become the core of something larger. Not quite an army, more like a pack of wolves teaching others to hunt. They're pulling back from Bangkok, Maria reported, studying intelligence on her tablet. Jakarta, too, concentrating forces in New York, London, Beijing. Let them huddle in their cities, former Navy SEAL Tom Chen said. We'll bleed them dry trying to supply those positions. Jack stared into the fire, seeing Danny's face in the flames. The war was far from over. Earth was still occupied, millions still enslaved or dead. But something fundamental had changed. The Zephyrins had come expecting to harvest another primitive world. Instead, they'd awakened something in humanity. Not its technology or its armies, but something older. The persistence hunter, the ambush predator, the survivor who'd clawed their way to the top of Earth's food chain, not through strength, but through cunning. Tomorrow we hit the supply base outside Denver, Jack said quietly. Tom, your team takes the armor depot. Maria, communications. I'll provide overwatch. What's the message this time? Someone asked. Jack pulled out a new photo. Not just Danny now, but dozens of children, faces collected from grieving parents who'd joined the resistance. All the young lives the Zephyrins had dismissed as primitive, insignificant. Their fathers and mothers send their regards, he said. In the depths of space aboard the Zephyrin flagship, Grand Admiral Tekvar studied the reports from Earth with growing concern. What should have been a simple resource extraction had become a quagmire. 40,000 soldiers deployed, 3,000 dead in 2 months. Not from armies or technology, but from primitives with chemical-propelled weapons hiding in wilderness areas. Recommend orbital bombardment of rural zones, an advisor suggested. Eliminate their hiding places. And destroy the resources we came for? Tekvar's scales rippled with frustration. No. We continue as planned. They are still primitives. This setback is temporary. He didn't mention the reports of similar tactics spreading to other occupied worlds. Didn't acknowledge that footage of the Ghost of Montana had somehow reached species under Zephyrin control across the galaxy. Didn't admit that for the first time in centuries, the Empire faced not a war of conquest, but an insurgency they didn't understand. On Earth, Jack Mitchell cleaned his rifle and prepared for tomorrow's hunt. The Zephrans thought they were the apex predators of the galaxy. They were about to learn why humans had no natural predators on their world. The real war was just beginning. The Galactic Council convened an emergency session for the first time in 3 centuries. Representatives from 47 species filled the vast chamber, their forms ranging from crystalline entities to gaseous beings contained in environmental suits. At the center, Grand Admiral Tekvar of the Zephyron Empire stood before them, his forearms held in a posture of formal address. "The human situation is contained," he insisted, projecting tactical displays that showed Earth's major cities under Zephyrin control. "Minor resistance in wilderness areas poses no strategic threat." Minor resistance? The Altarian ambassador's synthesized voice cut through the chamber. "Our intelligence suggests you've lost 15,000 soldiers in 6 months, to primitives." Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Zephyrins had built their empire on a reputation of invincibility. Now that image was cracking. "More concerning," the Veil Collective's representative added, their form shimmering with agitation, "are reports of similar tactics appearing on 17 other occupied worlds. The humans' methods are spreading." Tekvar's scales darkened. It was true. Somehow transmissions from Earth had reached enslaved populations across Zephyrin space. Primitive species were studying human guerrilla tactics, learning to exploit weaknesses in Zephyrin armor and doctrine. 3 worlds had seen uprising attempts in the past month alone. On Earth, Jack Mitchell didn't know about the council session. He was too busy teaching a group of former Olympic biathletes how to modify their competition rifles for combat. The precision sports shooters had proven devastating. Athletes who could shoot dime-sized targets while skiing were death incarnate when firing from concealed positions. "Remember, 1 shot, immediate displacement," Jack instructed, watching them practice on a makeshift range. "The moment you fire, you're already moving to your secondary position." His student communicator buzzed. A device reverse-engineered from captured Zephyrin technology, now standard equipment for resistance cells worldwide. The message was from Chen's team in Australia. "Package secured, big one." Jack smiled grimly. The package was a Zephyrin planetary communications array, stolen intact during a raid on Sydney's occupation headquarters. With it, they could do more than intercept enemy transmissions. They could broadcast their own. That night, in a hardened bunker beneath the Colorado mountains, Jack met with the Resistance leadership. What had begun as his personal war of vengeance had evolved into something neither he nor the Zephyrins had anticipated. A planetary insurgency with teeth. "We've cracked their communication protocols," Dr. Sarah Park, formerly of MIT, reported. Her team of scientists and hackers had been instrumental in understanding alien technology. "We can access their military networks, even send messages to their fleet." "What about broader transmission?" asked Colonel James Wright, the highest-ranking military officer to escape the initial attacks. "Can we reach their other occupied worlds?" Sarah's grin was predatory. "Already done. We've been broadcasting instructional videos for 3 weeks. Weapon modifications, armor weak points, tactical doctrine, 18 different alien languages, courtesy of their own translation software." Jack studied the star map they'd captured, showing Zephyrin-controlled space. Dozens of worlds, billions of enslaved beings, all potential allies if given the knowledge to fight back. "It's time to send a different kind of message," he said quietly. "Not just tactics, hope." The broadcast went out 72 hours later, reaching every Zephyrin-controlled world simultaneously. Jack had recorded it himself, standing in the ruins of Denver with the Rocky Mountains behind him. Maria had argued against showing his face, but he'd insisted. The galaxy needed to see that humans weren't hiding anymore. "My name is Jack Mitchell," the transmission began. "6 months ago, the Zephyrin Empire murdered my son. They called us primitives, said we were nothing but resources to harvest. They were wrong." The video showed compilation footage, resistance strikes, destroyed Zephyrin installations, freed human slaves, but more importantly, it showed humans and captured aliens working together. Several species, abandoned by their Zephyrin guards during retreats, had joined the resistance after experiencing human mercy. They want you to believe resistance is futile, that their technology makes them gods. But gods don't bleed. Gods don't fear shadows in the night. Gods don't abandon positions because they're afraid of ghosts with rifles. He held up Danny's photo, now worn from months of carrying it. "They took my son. They've taken sons and daughters on every world they've touched, but here's what they didn't understand about primitives. We remember our dead. We honor them, and we avenge them." The broadcast ended with technical specifications, weapon modifications, armor vulnerabilities, communication frequencies, everything the Resistance had learned, freely shared with the galaxy. On the Zephyrin flagship, Grand Admiral Thekvar watched the transmission with cold fury. The primitive's scarred face stared back at him from the screen, no longer hiding, no longer running. Behind those cold eyes, Thekvar saw something that chilled him to his core, not just vengeance, but purpose. "Prepare a full assault on the transmission source," he ordered. "Everything we have. I want that entire mountain range turned to glass." But even as Zephyrin forces mobilized, reports flooded in from across the Empire. On Kepler 442b, silicon-based slaves had modified mining equipment into weapons using human specifications. In the Vega system, an aquatic species had adapted Earth guerrilla tactics to underwater environments, striking at Zephyrin sea bases. The Ghost of Montana had become something more dangerous than a sniper. He'd become an idea. Jack watched the Zephyrin fleet movements from a new position, 50 miles from the bunker they'd already evacuated. Let them glass empty mountains. The Resistance had learned mobility from the Master. "Incoming priority transmission," Sarah announced over comms. "You're going to want to see this, Jack." The message was from an unexpected source, the Altarian Embassy, one of the few neutral powers in local space. Ambassador Zeph 9's crystalline form appeared on screen. "Jack Mitchell of Earth. The Galactic Council wishes to speak with humanity's representative regarding the current conflict. Safe passage is guaranteed." The Resistance leadership argued for hours. It could be a trap, an attempt to eliminate their most effective symbol. But Jack saw opportunity. The Zephyrons wouldn't have agreed to council mediation unless they were hurting worse than public reports suggested. 2 weeks later, Jack Mitchell stood where Grand Admiral Thekvar had stood, facing the assembled might of galactic civilization. He wore his marine dress uniform, medals gleaming, Danny's photo in his chest pocket. No armor, no visible weapons, just a human among species that could crush him with a thought. "The Council recognizes Jack Mitchell, speaking for the human resistance of Earth," the Prime Arbiter announced. "I don't speak for humanity," Jack corrected calmly. "I speak for the dead, for my son, for millions whose only crime was existing on a world the Zephyrins wanted. But if you want to know humanity's position, it's simple. Leave, now, forever." "Impossible," Thekvar interjected from his position. "Earth's resources are already allocated. The invasion has cost the Empire significant assets. We require compensation." Jack turned to face the alien who'd ordered his son's death. For 6 months he'd dreamed of this moment, planned what he'd say. But standing there, he felt only cold purpose. "Let me tell you what's impossible," Jack said, his voice carrying clearly through the chamber. "Conquering a species that turns its entire planet into a weapon. Holding territory where every mountain hides snipers, every forest conceals ambush points, every survivor becomes a teacher spreading the infection of resistance." He pulled out a data pad, displaying casualty figures the Zephrins had tried to hide. 23,000 Zephyrin dead, 41,000 wounded, 800 billion credits in destroyed equipment. And that's just Earth. Your other occupied worlds are learning. The Kepler mining operation is down 70%. Vega's underwater farms haven't produced a harvest in 3 months. The chamber erupted in discussion. The figures were far worse than official reports suggested. "You came to harvest worlds," Jack continued, raising his voice above the noise. "But you're harvesting rebellion. Every day you stay, the cost grows. Every dead Zephyrin teaches 10 slaves that you can be killed. Every destroyed installation proves you can be beaten." "Primitives cannot sustain such resistance," Thekvar snarled. "You will break. Your ammunition will run out. Your hiding places will be found." Jack smiled then, the first genuine expression he'd shown. "Admiral, we evolved on a death world. We've been killing each other with rocks and sticks for 200,000 years. You think we need advanced technology to wage war? You think we'll run out of ways to kill?" He gestured to the assembly. "Ask yourselves, is Earth worth it? Is any world worth teaching the galaxy that the Zephyrin Empire can be beaten by primitives with chemical weapons and patience?" The debate raged for hours. Economic projections showed the occupation becoming unsustainable within 2 years. Military advisors warned of the doctrinal infection spreading to every Zephyrin territory. The Empire's reputation, built over millennia, was crumbling in months. Finally, the Prime Arbiter called for order. "The Council has reached a decision. The Zephyrin Empire will withdraw from Earth immediately. Reparations will be paid to humanity from seized assets. Furthermore, Earth is granted protected status. No Council species may attempt invasion for 1,000 years. The relief in the chamber was palpable. Everyone wanted this conflict to end before the contagion of human tactics destabilized the entire galactic order. "One condition," Jack added, his voice cutting through premature celebration. "The Admiral comes with me." Silence fell like a hammer. "Explain," the Prime Arbiter said carefully. "Personal justice. He killed my son. By his own admission, it was his order. 1 life for 1 life. After that, humanity accepts the Council's terms." Thekvar's scales went pale. "The Council cannot sanction—" "The Council," the Altarian ambassador interrupted, "recognizes the human concept of blood debt. If Admiral Thekvar wishes to refuse personal combat, he may do so. Of course, such refusal would be—" "Noted." The challenge hung in the air. Refuse and be branded a coward who hid behind fleets while primitives hunted his soldiers. Accept and face the human who'd become death itself to the Zephyrin Empire. "I accept," Thekvar growled. The combat circle was ancient, used for honor duels since the Council's founding. Thekvar entered in full combat armor, plasma blade humming with energy. Jack entered in his dress uniform, carrying only a knife. A Kabar, standard Marine issue, the same one he'd carried through 3 wars. The aliens expected a quick execution. Plasma blade against primitive steel, enhanced Zephyrin strength against human frailty. They'd forgotten that Jack Mitchell had spent 6 months studying every aspect of Zephyrin biology, movement, and weakness. Thekvar attacked with the confidence of superior technology. Jack moved like water, like wind, like the ghost he'd been named. 20 years of combat experience against an opponent who'd spent centuries behind desks and displays. The plasma blade carved burning lines in the air where Jack had been. The Ka-Bar found gaps in armor joints where Jack now was. It wasn't a fight, it was a dissection, performed by a master anatomist who'd written the book on killing Zephrins. When Thekvar finally fell, green blood pooling on ancient stone, Jack knelt beside him. "Danny Mitchell," he whispered. "Remember his name?" He stood, cleaned his blade, and faced the assembled powers of the galaxy. "Humanity accepts the Council's terms. Leave our world. Don't come back." The withdrawal took 3 months. Zephyrin forces abandoned positions, destroyed what they couldn't take, and retreated to orbit. Resistance cells ensured they left nothing useful behind, shadowing every movement until the last transport lifted off. Jack stood on the same Montana hill where Danny had died, watching alien ships disappear into the sky. Around him, the forest was already reclaiming Zephyrin landing sites, Earth healing itself as it always had. "We did it. Buddy," he whispered to the wind, "we sent them running." But the real victory came later, in transmissions intercepted from across the galaxy. 17 worlds successfully expelled Zephyrin occupations using human tactics. The Empire, reduced and humiliated, retreated to its core systems. The Galactic Council issued new protocols for dealing with primitive species, acknowledging that technology alone didn't determine a species' threat level. Earth became a legend, the death world that ate empires. Humans were offered council membership but declined. They'd develop space travel on their own terms, in their own time. When they finally emerged into the galactic community 50 years later, it was as equals, not subjects. Jack Mitchell lived another 20 years, teaching new generations the skills that had saved Earth. He never remarried, never fully left the mountains that had sheltered humanity's resistance. When he died, peacefully in his sleep, they found him clutching Danny's photo. They buried him beside his son, under a simple stone that read, "Jack Mitchell, father, Marine, teacher he remembered." In Zephyrin military academies, his name became synonymous with the impossible, the primitive who broke an empire. Officers studied his tactics, trying to understand how one grieving father had turned a planet into a weapon. They never quite grasped the answer. It wasn't about tactics or technology, it was about something uniquely human, the ability to turn loss into purpose, grief into determination, love into an unstoppable force. The Zephrins had killed a boy. In doing so, they'd created their nightmare, and in the end, the nightmare had won. Across the galaxy, on worlds that had learned to fight back, they still told the story. How Earth stood alone against impossible odds. How fathers and mothers became ghosts in the night. How humanity proved that sometimes the most primitive emotion, a parent's love for their child, was the most powerful weapon in the universe. The ghost of Montana had given them more than tactics. He'd given them hope. And hope, as the Zephyrin Empire learned too late, was the most dangerous weapon of all.